Okay, and you're listening to Hashim's podcast on this Thursday afternoon. It's actually very strange. I'm in Cairo, and our wonderful guest is all the way from South Africa. And in my knowledge of time, I have absolute no knowledge of time. I don't understand how we are on the same time difference, even though she's all the way in South Africa and I am all the way up in Cairo. I'll let you know who our guest is before we get on to talks about time, literature, festivals, and obviously her amazing body of work. So today we are lucky enough to be talking to all the way from South Africa, Shafinaaz Hassim, who is an independent sociologist and author based in South Africa. She lives in a world of words, stories, shaping new forms of delight for readers of all ages. Her works have been commended in various local and international awards, including the SALA, the SALA K Sello Duiker Award, the UJ Prize for Creative Writing in English, and the NIHSS Literary Awards. In 2014, she was listed by UNESCO and the London Book Fair as one of the top 39 writers in South Africa under the age of 40. Her novel, The Economics of Love and Happiness, was longlisted for the NIHSS Literary Awards 2021. Darlings of Durban was published in Kwela in February 2024. She is also the author of Nisa Qamar, adventure series for young adults, which has been shortlisted twice for the Minara Aziz Hassim Literary Awards and the prestigious Sanlam Prize for Youth Literature 2019. Kemia Writes and the Mystery of the Melting Trees launched in November 2024. Now, I have the pleasure of knowing Shafinaaz for more than 16 years. We actually collaborated on a poetry project. Shafinaaz had a fantastic anthology of poets from all around the world, and she chose one of my poems back then, and I was really privileged to have one of my poems in her book. So we are reuniting again. Good afternoon, Shafinaaz from South Africa.
Good afternoon, Mo. It's just wonderful to be on your podcast and to hear how far you've come in furthering the industry of publishing and media. So it's great to be on your show.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to see you once again. You've been a great support also. You're a sociologist, and I studied a tiny bit of sociology, and I used to always, randomly send you stuff over the many years about sociology, and I learned so much from you. And then I went on and dedicated myself to drama and film and all that sort of stuff. So talk to me about your history in sociology and how that shaped your history in writing and how it all began for you.
I think with me, I've always loved writing. I've been writing since I was quite little. And inevitably, I think I would have found myself into the space, into the literary space, into the publishing industry, as it were. When I think back to 2011-12, when we published the Belly of Fire series, I called it the Anthologies for Social Change. It was really about taking social exploration through short story and poetry, and we, rightly so, collected one of your poems and put it into that collection back then, and it had such a great reception. And the idea that story really is such a great way to access conversations with the public space, the public domain. In the past, it was more sort of a live audience, and now we're dealing and accessing so many more digital audiences. So for me, sociology was really the impetus for being sort of observant participant in the dynamic that is social life, documenting the stories that I was observing and researching at the time. At the very beginning, my first book was actually based on my sociology thesis. Back in 2003, I completed the thesis, and by 2007, I published it as a book called Daughters Are Diamonds, Honor, Shame, and Seclusion, a South African Perspective. And I draw on cultural aspects of sort of Islam, the patriarchal reading of the Quranic text, and how it's operationalized in the lives of Muslim women, particularly living in South Africa. We're a smallish community in South Africa. There's sort of less than 1 million people in South Africa that are Muslim, that follow the Islamic faith. But it's such an interesting sort of dynamic to view how Muslim women operationalize cultural aspects of Islam, and living in a democratic country, having all these um, opportunities before them. So there's this public and private kind of dynamic that plays in the lives of Muslim women. And this also was part of my very original research back then, 20 years ago. Subsequently, I've written a lot of short stories, poetry, novels. I've just signed an offer to publish my 19th book earlier this week. And so I think that it's just an impetus to continue using the vehicle of story to create these conversations around social issues we face, but also to celebrate who we are, as people, and to create that window into our world. And that's been the inspiration for all of my work across the years that I've been doing what I do.
Fantastic. So a lot of this work was part of your thesis, wasn't it? Your sociological thesis. Can you give us a little bit of history about the community in South Africa? Because there's a whole different diaspora in South Africa. You got so many different types of South Africans. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, even if we just look at the Muslim community in South Africa, there's being Muslim is not a monolithic entity. Even if you're in a small space, we're in this little country on the southern tip of Africa, and I think creating waves in many ways, politically, socially, professionally, with limited resources often. So we're a country with a dynamic of a big chunk of the population living below the breadline. There are sort of the dynamic of, issues of housing and service delivery and that sort of thing. But we also a very hardworking population of just over 50 million people, and very politically active, very politically conscious people. As you know, South Africa was one of the first countries to take Israel to the ICJ 2 years ago, and that's ongoing, and many countries have come on board with that. But generally, in terms of population, there's also a changing dynamic, as one would see with newer generations. So what would be seen as the activist generation now is also a very consumerist generation, a very goal-oriented perhaps generation, but goals towards living the life that is seen online, comparing with a very globalized kind of idea of what it means to live the good life. And sometimes that takes away from the political consciousness, I think. And so there's that generational kind of gap that needs to be filled. In some ways, I think if you look at the communities that exist in South Africa, there's also great collaboration and tolerance, religious tolerance, political tolerance, a very dynamic democratic space for conjecture, for ideas, for women wearing the hijab or, any kind of cultural dress. There's great tolerance and celebration. Obviously, you get pockets of concern where there might be a small community that decides they don't want to be able to hear the adhan playing out loud, and they'll have a comment about a mosque being put up. But those are very isolated incidences. For the most part, we've got great collaboration, and I'm really very grateful to live in a country where that sort of can happen, where those conversations can still happen without being, without having to watch over your shoulder or that sort of thing.
So what
So the
about
dynamic is there to exist in that sense.
Yeah, because remember, I got introduced to you when I was on radio back 16 years ago. I was working for IOL Radio with BB Vadvala. She introduced me to the whole South African connection network. And I'm just like, wow, who are these amazing people? And you've been telling me to come to a place called Durban for many years. You made me fall in love with South Africa, but I never got the chance to get there. Give us a little picture about, everyone thinks South Africa's a danger hot pot, don't go to South Africa, you're going to get killed, everyone's getting robbed every day. Give us a little bit more a picturesque, a picture idea of South Africa, what's actually happening there.
I mean, I can't deny the crime stats. Just like any major city around the world, you have to be careful. There's spaces you just wouldn't go into. And Johannesburg, for example, is not any less. Cape Town has its share of crime. Our major cities are sort of bereft with crime. I'm a small town girl. I grew up in a small town in the northern region called Limpopo, and it's a little less exciting out there. I love going out there to write. You spoke of Durban. So the great thing about Durban is it's on the east coast of South Africa, and it's a melting pot of creative exuberance, if you can call it that. I work for the Center for Creative Arts based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which is one of the oldest universities in Durban. And what the center does is it curates a number of festivals throughout the year. I curate the Time of the Writer Festival, which will be in its 29th year running this year. And we're so excited about being able to bring authors from the continent, from around South Africa, from different parts of the world together, and to continue and create these conversations around what's current and what's happening in the literary space. I think you'll agree with me when I say when we came through COVID, it was the arts and literature that really kept us alive, and from the space of our homes, we were able to engage with literature, with material, with film and with plays and that sort of thing. So the center has they host the Durban Film Festival, the Time of the Writer, Poetry Africa, the Jomba Dance Festival. There's a range of festivals. Artfluence is a more sort of art and science-based festival. And what's fantastic about it is that this kind of drawing bridges between the different art and culture sectors across South Africa just makes the space so exciting to work in, and also reminds us that if arts was sort of a domain of race in the past dispensation, it is now really a collaborative space where expression is seen as important, where life is seen as a form of art. And I think it's just a great way, which is why I'm so excited when I say to people, come to Durban, because that's where it's really hot and happening. And we really bring artists together at the space. And my senior colleague, Dr. Ismail Mohammed, has been in the industry for decades. I think he's received so many international awards. He used to be the festival director at the National Arts Festival in Grahamstown, which you have heard about. And he's really reignited the space with so many new ideas. So I'm really excited to see what's on for the rest of the year. And I'm hoping that people, not just here on home ground, will make Time of the Writer and all of our festivals, our sister festivals, destination festivals, to come and see what we have on offer in this little country, South Africa, and to take our stories out into the world.
I really love the accent. It reminds me of the documentary "Searching for Sugar Man," the story of Rodriguez, yeah, the musician who was number one in South Africa. He didn't know anything about it. Apparently, he went back to America. I think it was Seattle, and he lived the rest of his life there. And it took a documentary filmmaker. I think it was 2000 and I think it was mid 2000s, like 2015. He did the whole searching for Sugar Man. Um, got all of these old producers and record labels, and he went around the world until he found out he lives in Seattle, working as a laborer somewhere in Seattle, bringing up like three girls. And then he went and told him, "You've been number one in South Africa for many years, as your work has always been anti-establishment." And he was compared to Mick Jagger and all the classics. So, do you know anyone who was part of that film? And who was Rodriguez for the South Africans?
I remember watching this quite some time back, so I don't remember the details. But you know what stood out for me when I watched the movie? I remember going out to get the soundtrack immediately after, because I think it was just before my time. But the overarching message that I remember from that was sometimes you create art just for the sake of it, and talent is not always recognized at its time of birth, at its inception. And it's kind of sad if you think about it, because why do we wait? Or maybe there's an energy about certain productions that they only find their time, they're born before their time, and they only find their audience much later, sometimes even after the content originator is gone from this world. And I felt it was kind of sad and happy, this mixture of emotions, to know the story of Rodriguez, that the real fame just came after he had gone, and it was just intercepted so beautifully. So yeah, I mean, I wonder sometimes if we're not always, if we don't really appreciate the talent that we see on the ground. There's so many greats that have gone from South Africa that are celebrated afterwards. that are given these massive awards posthumously and then not really appreciated for their work at the time. And I think sometimes we've got to give people their flowers while they're around, whether it's in the literary spaces, in the film industry, in theatre, which has increasingly become sort of, still valued, but I think younger generations don't seem to see the realness of how powerful and impactful theatre is. And you can actually tell in film when someone has a theatre background, or if they've just come in as, these TikTok 2-minute video types who've just tried to get into the space. And I mean, with respect to different forms of content creation, there's a value in the life of theater that you can actually add to with your passion and experience that makes for authenticity of presenting a story. So yeah, I think the real big story across the board, and it's probably not just in South Africa, is to appreciate the talent we have in front of us and to really put resource behind it to develop that talent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, South Africa, from what I've studied over the years and seen, it's definitely a nation of writers, poets, theatre makers, and definitely for me, because I studied drama for many years, and then I lived all my work in drama away from the media, is the basis of storytelling. You need to know how to introduce a story, the main character, the antagonist versus the protagonist. Where's the journey going? If you have that formula and know about the climax and the resolution, if you can have that formula, you can use it anywhere. You can use it on film and small videos, even talking, making a speech. So that's the basis for me of storytelling. Um, let's go back to your work. The last book you wrote, what was the inspiration for that? Because you said you got 19 books, which is amazing.
So 19 will be due out later this year. I'm very excited about it because I've just been offered, a contract to publish. The great thing about being able to put these stories out there is that I've always had human interest story, but specifically a celebration of women. So my last adult novel was called Darlings of Durban. I had to write this novel about women celebrating life in Durban or just living life in Durban. And it was really a fun write. A lot of my previous work has dealt with human trafficking or gender-based violence. I took a lot of my sociological research into the dream of fiction, and it's created a great platform for conversation. But this time it was just Darlings of Durban, a celebration of these four female friends. And inevitably, I believe the intimate narrative is political. For me, the political is personal, and the personal is rather political as well. And I did, get at least one negative review that said, well, can chick lit be taken seriously? And it's an interesting conversation to have, because why in the 21st century are we still having to defend writing stories for women by women as seen as not serious enough or not political enough? It's a conversation that really needs to be had. But if we talk about most recent, I write two children's series.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Are you someone that advocates for, because I heard a writer talk about, she's against the fact that women need their own awards, women's awards for writing. She's like, why? Why should we? That just proves that women are not regarded in the industry or in that genre. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, just to be able to pink wash and say, well, now this is regarded for women. And even with my children's series, I get moms coming up to me and saying, I have a 13-year-old son. Is this, something he would be able to read? And I think, why are we still genderizing and so polarizing this concept of what literature means if it's written by women and it has to be said that, it's written in this way in this day and age? And I think absolutely, let us sort of be on platforms of equality across the board and have our stories being read on that basis. The domain of, if I speak from a South African perspective, the domain of the white male writer is seen as authority in various spaces, including the literary spaces, is a dying concept. So we can definitely stand on equal playing fields and write and speak and publish and perform our content and allow audiences to decide the quality of their content.
Fabulous. So a little bit more about your story. So your story is based on a non-fiction idea, like a sociological idea, and then you start working on the fiction side of it, or how do you construct the mechanics of your work? How do you, you put the work together? Is it a pre-plan before that where you write out the history and the facts, and then you start adding characters to the story, or how's it done for you?
I think data provides such a great opportunity to present those themes in the form of to be carried by characters, protagonists, and other characters in a novel. So I found back when I did my research for Daughters Are Diamonds, obviously I was looking for specific themes around marriage, childhood, educate, sort of socialization through childhood and marriage and that sort of thing. But I also found a theme emerging for me that was important to write back then, which was domestic violence, specifically in the Muslim community. Because I was observing and I was, researching and speaking to women, and that didn't feature specifically in my research, but I wanted to write the story. And back in 2012, when this book was published, it was called Sophia. It was about, a middle class family living in Johannesburg, and I wrote the story where a young couple was dealing with some of the aspects that come through, which is living this glamorous lifestyle, an abused woman not telling people what she's going through, and seeing the sort of impact it was having on her children. She had a little girl and a little boy in the household, and how they were relating to the fights that they were witnessing. And I think all of that dynamic came through just by being able to present that data in the form of what the characters were experiencing. So it wasn't based on one person or one experience. I was able to bring different social psychology kind of aspects into the story. So the process was very different back then. I was thoughtful around bringing the data in. And I think after writing for many years, what happens is that process happens a lot faster. And I'm able to bring the data that I've experienced through the research into the story, and operationalize this character and live in get into the shoes of this character and start to live the story around building the character more than just wanting to give the data into the story. And I think that's changed the way I write. It's changed the way I've moved from more literary writing to a kind of um, easy dialogue, easily accessible writing that's almost ready for script kind of writing. And that leap has been great because coming from an academic background, that initial storytelling was really, really hard labor. I remember having dreams about it, trying to break into the concrete. I remember seeing the story as this block of concrete that needed to be carved out. And I think that over time, that process and my process of writing has changed, where I'm able to quickly take the material, the data, the thematic kind of consideration, and transfer it very quickly into a protagonist that I start to build on. What do they like to eat? How do they view the world? What kind of conversations do they have? How do they choose their dialogue? Do they like to be around people? What kind of clothing do they choose to wear? What do they see when they walk around a supermarket? Noticing people's trolleys, their baskets, you can tell a story out of that. And so your whole way of viewing the world changes as a fiction writer. And you break ground with how much you observe. You pay attention to how people choose their words, whether they choose silence over certain conversations, and all of that comes through in developing these characters and hopefully authenticating these characters as well. So it's part data observation and part imagination that suddenly comes to play, which I think my first novel, I feel, missed some of that, but it was important to have that sort of foundation for me to get to where my writing is now.
Yeah, fabulous. That's so fascinating. When you begin the writing process of writing a novel, is it like being in a relationship with the novel and the characters? Is it like a continuous grappling between you and the words, you and the characters, you and the scenery? And then when you finish the novel, what happens then? Is it like a disconnect? Is it a disassociation that happens? Do you feel like you've lost something when you've written a novel? When you sell the novel, when you read the novel to people, or is it an embrace?
I think what it's become is I've had to learn to separate myself from a work once it's done and let it go let my editor have a look at it, let an external reader look at it, and step away from it so that I can have that degree of distance. The thing with the manuscript, whether it's a PhD or a fictional novel, is you can go on for years with it. And at some point, you need somebody to tell you, okay, let's stop at this point. You've rounded up the story. Let's see how we can get it to publication. And obviously, it takes a great deal of work with a really good and insightful, a visionary editor who sees your story and can help you to clear the sort of smoke screen and really like make your story shine. So I'm grateful also to having worked over the years with some wonderful editors, some brutal editors as well. So I think that I'm not very precious about the writing. Once I've done with it, I'm able to step away, take a break, take a breather, and then work on the next story. And I've sometimes got story seeds, story ideas that I write into short story because I've just got to bank them until I've got the chance to get to that story. So when you're in the flow state and when you enjoy what you do, I think that's sort of something to watch out for, is that the stories are there. There's just not enough time to get to all of them at once, and they're all begging for your attention to be written. But I've also learned the discipline of completing a manuscript, putting it aside, sending it off to my commissioning editor and saying, well, you look at it, you think this has some potential, and then the feedback will come. The initial feedback is always brutal, and I'm very happy about that, because then it sort of pushes you to bring out and to make it shine and to keep working at it, and then obviously moving on to the next one. So I think knowing that I have this intention and this commitment to continue writing stories that depict life around me, and to celebrate the women that I come across, the men that I come across, and to even sort of celebrate children, because I write 2 children's series as well, and to draw on my past experiences when I bring those stories out, is it's a commitment, it's a special delight, and it makes me as the writer not really the content originator, but also just an instrument, just like the pen and the computer and the notebook, an instrument on this process to get those stories out there. And I hope that I have enough life in me to continue doing that to a good amount of time.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got plenty more time to go. You've done so much work, and there's a lot more to go. Something that I've realized in my career in drama and media, and even I've dabbled a bit in opera recently also, is that when we think we've done the great masterpiece, it never is the case. And when we think we've done the worst work, people just love it. Have you had that experience where you've written a character, you've written a novel, and you go, "This is the one," and everyone's like, "No, not this one." And then you write something that's like, "Yeah, it's not that great," and then everyone's like, "That's the one, that's the great one," whether it's the character or the storyline. I've heard that so many times by opera singers who get up on stage and sing, and they think they sounded horrible, and the audience just loved it, and vice versa. Same thing with plays. I just did a play in America recently, and I didn't think it was a great play, but it was getting traction, and other ones that I worked on longer got nothing. So have you had that experience where you've in your mind it was the great masterpiece novel, the great South African story, and then something else happened, and then another story became more prominent?
I can't say that I think I've written the great South African story, but I will continue to write and hope that it's received well. But on the other hand, I've written characters, for example, Darlings of Durban with the 4 women, where I've had some people say they absolutely loved a certain character, and some say, this character really got on their nerves, and they actually liked another character. So it's interesting to see how people receive and maybe connect and understand, or maybe make sense of certain characters that you've written based on their own, drawing from their own life experiences, perhaps. And I think that's part of writing, to be able to have people relate to your writing that either makes them incredibly happy or incredibly angry. It's an emotion, and you want that response. You want to be able to create that response. So that's exciting for me. And I think that, in terms of getting work out there, um, there's a point where the distance is important. I believe that once a book is published, it might have my name on the cover, but it stops belonging to me. It starts belonging to whoever the reader is. Take the story, read it, own it, hate it, love it, but it's yours now. And it takes on a life of its own. It remains a kind of living organism as a story that transfers between, consciousness rather. So everyone's reading now and getting to know these characters and maybe deciding for themselves through those stories whether they would behave like that or whether they would change something about their lives that looks annoying or irritating or perhaps delightful from that situation this woman is going through in the story. And that's what I hope to accomplish, to create a kind of shift in thinking through story. And I think this has been used over thousands of years, that story is just a way of changing the way we think, of altering the way we think, and of maybe creating solutions. And in my small way, I hope I'm adding to that great conversation through the ages that allows people to rethink, how they live or the decisions that they make, or find a way through whatever problem they're faced with.
Yeah, Anton Chekhov used to always say a great story begins with the audience saying, "Who are these people in the story?" And midway through, I sort of recognize these people. And then if it's a great story, at the end of it, the audience should say, "I am these people." So do you think about making the story relatable as much as possible to your readers? Do you think about your readers continuously when you're writing it?
I think I try to authenticate my characters as much as possible. They're not always shining, glorious characters. We are messy as human beings, and we need to be able to write that messiness into our stories. And that's what makes it relatable. So it's not so much about, um, wanting people to love the characters always, but just being true to the character in their messiness, in their glory, in everything that we face and accomplish as human beings. And once you're able to do some of that, people naturally either gravitate towards those characters or find something that they can relate or not relate to, because maybe characters shouldn't always be relatable, but they should be real. I think that sort of gives me some kind of motivation to write.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your time. We won't take too much longer of your time, but I do want to know, do you have it doesn't seem like you do, but you might have, do you have a favorite character that you've written over all these years? A favorite
Oh
character that
goodness.
you've written? Yeah.
I think my children's series, the Nisa Qamar series, is absolutely delightful for me. It was so amazing writing for children after having written all of these serious issues. And it's not that in the children's stories I don't deal with social issues, but it's a lot more subtle. I deal with a situation where Nisa has to consider bullying, her finding out that her sister is being bullied in the classroom. The children form a homework group to help each other, things like that. But what happens is when you write a children's story, you have to I think it's more difficult. You have to step away from the dusty adult thinking and start to remember the wonders of being a child, but also the stresses of being a child. And the series has been well received because it takes so many of my adult readers back to childhood, the simple sort of aspects of childhood, the days before technology, the days of riding a bicycle to school instead of always being, on a metro or having been driven to school. We don't have a very
Wow.
big transport grid here, so parents end up busing children or driving children to school, and I think it's a safety issue as well. So I think just being able to go back to those stories, to remembering, and there's not a lot of material in South Africa written about Muslim children growing up. So that was another reason why the character became popular. And as you know, those are Arabic words, Nisa and Qamar. So the latest book, the fifth book in the series, is called The Fellowship of the Moon, where she comes to terms with the idea of her identity and what it means, to be named in this way. And so it's really a coming of age story that rounds up the
We
series
need
in
to bring
five
you to
books, and I've
have
really
you
enjoyed writing.
have you translated your works into other languages like Arabic and I think they'll be very interested in this side of the world to read your work.
Well, I would definitely consider speaking to publishers in that side of the
Yeah.
world, because
Well,
I
we
think
should
the
organize
story
that for you. Yeah.
would definitely engage audiences. I should send some copies your way so you can have a look at it.
Yes, please. We have some great translators here, and we actually have the Cairo Book Fair on at the moment. You can check up the Cairo Book Fair. It's huge. I've never seen anything like it in the world. Everyone is there, not just, the elite readers and the elite writers and artists. the whole public's here, and I find that very fascinating. In Australia, where I'm from, the writing festivals or Wheeler Writer Centre, all the writing festivals are for specific people. The good thing about this side of the world, everyone reads books more. So I think it's fascinating. So before we go, can you read something of your work? Just a little couple of lines that you know, or if you don't mind. I like to get the artist to, if he's a singer, to sing, if he's a writer, to read, just something. And if it's not in English, even better. If there's something that's in a different language, also. Do you mind?
So I haven't actually picked out a book. I'm going to have to
Yeah, go for it.
see
Take your time. Yeah, yeah.
if I
Just
have
any,
anything
just a
online.
couple of lines would be great to get a taste in your of your world.
I
Just
don't
any,
seem to have Nisa Qamar, but I'm going to choose Darlings of Durban, I think.
fabulous.
Oh, I've been packing up books. So this is a 9-year-old's series. It's called Kimia Writes.
Okay.
It's about a little girl who wants to learn how to write. This is one of the Nisa Qamar. It's called The Circle of the Astrolabe. It's book 4 in the Nisa Qamar series. And they all have a kind of Islamic ethos, but it's written for a mainstream audience, so it's been well received. And finally, this is Darlings of Durban. And I would have happily chosen a piece if I knew we were going to write, if we were going to read, but let's see if I can quickly find something. So this is chapter 4. I think it'll give a taste of all the different women. I have another favorite, but I won't be able to find it right away.
It's all right.
I enjoy reading pieces that give a taste of the city that they're in. Sophia is obviously one of the characters. Sophia allowed the cool breeze to wash over as she sat down to pray near the poolside. It was so pleasant just before 5 a.m., it was sure going to be a warm day. The morning air held a mystical stillness about it. It was her favorite time of the day. She woke for Fajr prayer and then spent about half an hour reflecting on a few pages of the Quran. When she felt replenished, she usually sauntered over to her home studio or sat in the jacuzzi for a while before the children came down for breakfast. After they left, Mivani came by for a quick yoga session. Beyond that, the day surrendered to meal prep and homework, managing her household, and keeping things in order for the rest of the family. She felt grateful for a life filled with joy, luxury, and contentment. But she was looking forward to meeting up with the girls for brunch today. It had been ages since they'd had a proper sit down. The darlings were up to date on all the important happenings in one another's lives, but nothing beats sitting around the table with your friends and getting the tea in real time. She was filled with excitement. Today was a special occasion to get dressed up and spend some time catching up over delicious treats. She had hoped to host them at home, but they'd insisted that she relax and that they would go out to eat at one of their favorite restaurants, the Baroque Cafe, an eclectic space known for its secluded garden, pretty tea sets, and divine cuisine. She knew the cousins Farhana and Razia from varsity days. They were teenagers when they met, so she considered them childhood friends. Razia's successful physiotherapy practice in Joburg kept her busy and somewhat aloof. Farhana juggled home life, her feeding scheme, and life's various ups and downs. Sophia felt a pang of guilt for not making more time to check up on her. It would be a good time to see them. And then there was Natasha Nana, the daughter of a minister, political royalty, so to speak. They had met a few years ago when she'd returned to South Africa, but she'd grown up in the UK, where her parents had spent most of their exile years, and chose Durban to start her chain of cosmetic stores. She remembered when Natasha had come to the dealership to purchase a new car. They'd hit it off immediately. She admired how Natasha had set up a business and had gone all out to smash all her goals and kept on rising. Natasha now had something like 40 stores around the country, positioning her as one of the premium companies in her industry in a short space of time.
Well, it's an
So just
absolute
loads of
pleasure to hear the novelist read her own work. and I really, really enjoyed that. I hope we can do some collaborations with this side of the world, Cairo, and also Australia. Our audience are from Australia, America, Europe, and obviously Egypt. So definitely, Shafinaaz, an absolute pleasure, and definitely your work needs to reach other continents like Australia and perhaps also in Arabic to Egypt. Been an absolute pleasure to see you again and have this fabulous conversation with you and enter your world and your imagination. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to catch up and to share some of my work. Sometimes it just gives a bit of sort of grounding for continuing the work once you have spoken about the process. So it's great to have revisited all these memories, and thank you for having me.
Absolute bliss. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Hashim's podcast brought to you by ANZEG Institute, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt. Thank you for having us this afternoon. Bye. I'm going to hang up, but I'll call you. I'll speak to you on the other one. Bye.